This is Amby welcoming you to the latest episode of our podcast, Running State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week, we have a great conversation with Kevin Hanson, who's one of the brothers behind the well-known Hansons Brooks Running Team out of Michigan. They'll be taking a real strong team of marathoners to the trials in February. And that's one of the main reasons we wanted to speak with Kevin.
And that team's been together, Amby, for 2 decades now and produced many resounding successes, particularly in the marathon. The team's 2 most widely known runners, I would say, are Brian Sell and Des Linden, both who made Olympic teams. And of course, Des also won the 2018 Boston Marathon. But before we speak with Kevin, Amby and I want to discuss some of the biggest recent news stories in the running world. Amby, what have you been looking at this week?
Well, I'm still really attracted to the story of Dathan Ritzenhein and his family of runners, by which I mean his daughter Addison, who just won the Nike cross-country nationals as a sophomore. Dathan twice won Foot Locker as a junior and a senior, but she won an equivalent race as a sophomore. They did a nice podcast with DieStat, and I thought, well, let's listen to this and see what kinds of instruction Dathan has been giving his daughter to make her such a great runner. And the answer was, and this is quite wonderful, essentially hands off. He says her high school coaches are terrific, and basically, I don't even know what she's doing until the day after when I've seen it or find out from her. So it was quite refreshing that he and his wife were hands off with their daughter Addison, and that she was succeeding tremendously just by having fun with her teammates. And then a week later, the whole family was out in Honolulu for all the running events there. And it looks like Dathan ran a 4:38 in the mile, and his son, who's just 14, ran a 5:04, which is pretty terrific. On the marathon scene, C.J. Albertson just continues to astound. A little more than a week ago, he won the California International Marathon in a 2:11:10. Now 2:11:09, A week later, he goes to Mexico and runs a race there, another marathon, in 2:11:10, 1 second slower. Well, why does he do this? What's significant about it? It turns out that the CIM course is a downhill course and is therefore not eligible for World Athletics ranking, as everyone tries to qualify for the Paris Olympics. But the marathon course in Mexico was flat and eligible, and C.J. Albertson has now hit the Paris qualifying time, which means very likely that if he finishes in the top 3 in Orlando in the marathon trials, he could be on the team going to Paris.
Yeah, well, good for CJ. 2 marathons back to back, a week apart. That's you got to take your hat off to that one. Yeah, I wanted to mention another young running star, Caitlin Toohey, who announced this past week that she's turning pro and will not be finishing out her eligibility at North Carolina State. And as we all know, she's had an absolutely sensational career there. And in a really good interview with Chris Chavez, she talked about her reasoning as to why she's doing it and how she's going to go about it. She's going to stay with her coach in Raleigh, Laurie Hennis, whom she's developed a very close relationship with. And at the same time, she's going to begin to do some altitude training in Flagstaff, which will be interesting. She's not done that before. And this gives her a chance, not having to run at the collegiate level, to really focus on next year's Olympic trials, where I think she could become a serious contender at 5,000 meters. She's shown that she's got the speed and really focusing now and not having to, perform and score points, meet after meet for North Carolina State, I think really opens that door to her, and it's going to be fun to watch Caitlin Toohey going forward.
It's not only going to be fun, there's going to be a whole lot of us rooting for her because she's been in the spotlight for many years now with her terrific high school career in New York State. And every step of the way, she's carried herself and her attitude towards the sport and the importance of her teammates right at the front of her running. And that, of course, has made a lot of us big, big fans. And so that's the biggest running news as George and I see it here from Running State of the Sport. Running State of the Sport is brought to you by marathonhandbook.com and runlongrunhealthy.com. Marathon Handbook is the world's leading marathon website with a special focus on trustworthy running information and free runner-tested training plans for all ability levels.
Run Long, Run Healthy is Amby's weekly newsletter with the newest, most scientific, and most useful training advice for runners.
Now let's turn to our guest this week, Kevin Hanson of the well-known Hansons Brooks Running Team from Michigan. Kevin and his team are headed to Orlando because there happens to be a little race there at the beginning of February, the Marathon Trials. They've had Olympians in the past on that team, and we'll talk about that. And they're certainly hoping for another one this year, or next year, I should say. Kevin, it's great to have you with us here on the podcast, Running State of the Sport.
Thank you, both Amby and George, for having me. It's an honor to be with people that I respect and see as legends in the sport, truthfully.
So, Kevin, why don't you begin by telling us and our listeners a little bit about you, your bio, how old are you? Where are you living now? Where did you grow up? Your family, career? Just give us a little sense of that.
Yep, I was born and raised in Michigan and never ventured too far from there. I went to school as a freshman at Central Michigan University and then transferred to Oakland University, which was a D2 school then. It's a D2 school, D1 school now. And that's where I graduated from with an English major and with plans of teaching secondary ed. And coaching at the high school level. And so I started, and as a runner myself, I have real modest times and things, nothing that's worth bragging about. I ran 2:32 in the marathon. I've run 30:21 for 10K. I've run 14:46 for 5K. I've ran 68:35 for a half marathon. And so, but those were all many moons ago, and that's not really what we're here to talk about.
No, but the difference between you and me is if I had those times, I'd be bragging about them. They're pretty, they're pretty decent. So good.
I always tell people I'm not good enough to make my own team. So
yeah, that I bet is true.
How about retail running? You said you were going to be an English teacher, or you thought you were, and then somehow you got into the retail scene. Again, we don't need to know the whole history, but how did that happen? Starting running shops in Michigan.
I was teaching and coaching. I still continued to coach after we opened the stores. But I coached high school girls for 34 years and retired in 2016 from that. I was teaching before we opened the stores, but we opened the stores so soon that I don't really have any big teaching memories. But I started other than I consider coaching teaching. So that's really my only aspect with there. But we opened the stores in 1991. So we've been at it for, over 30 years now. So it's, but I always joke and tell people that, there's people that are businessmen that are involved with owning running stores. And then there's runners that are involved with the business side. And we definitely come from the runner side and the passion side of all of that.
So you mentioned coaching high school girls. Was your daughter one of them? I know she stayed in the world of running, and she's working for Howie Mavleski right now, whom Amby and I had a fabulous podcast with Howie some weeks ago, and he was really terrific. Yeah.
I mentioned to Samantha that I was going to be speaking with you guys, and she said, "Oh, Howie just did that podcast." I said, "Oh, awesome!" So, I was aware that happened. I wasn't until like yesterday or the day before when I was talking to Samantha about this. Yes, I was going to retire from because I was full board into coaching the professional athletes, and I was going to retire at 30 years. And my daughter said, "Dad, are you kidding me? Like, that was the year, the next year would be the year she'd be a freshman." And so I was like, I'm intense as a coach. I'm intense in everything I do. And so I wasn't sure I wanted to coach my own kid. I've seen people screw it up too many times. And so we reluctantly had our conversation that, Samantha, yes, I will coach you. I will stick around and coach high school for another 4 years, as long as no matter what happens at practice, what happens at a meet, no matter what's said or how you feel, that I'm the first hug. And the day that I'm not the first hug is the day I'm done coaching you. And so I took my dad role far more important than I did my coaching role. And so that was important to me.
Well, there's nothing much more important than hugs. Before we ask you about the beginning of the Hansons Brooks Running Team, there's at least another half to the story, a brother named Keith. Tell us a little about him and what various roles do the two of you play?
I'll tell you, Keith's start in the sport was much more interesting than mine. When I was getting ready to go to college my freshman year, I was going to be a walk-on at that time. And the college coach was not really receptive to having walk-ons. And in high school, we were running 45, 50 miles a week. And he said to me, if you want to be any part of this team, you better be prepared to run 70 miles the day you walk in here. And 70 miles a week. And I said, wow, that seemed like a lot. A couple of buddies of mine were already in college. They came back. I said, how much you guys running? How much? Between 70 and 80 miles a week. It's a different time. This was 1978. And so mileage nobody was afraid of mileage then. And so my 13-year-old brother, my buddies and I decided, well, we'll just go out and run 10 miles every day. And that's all we did. We ran 10 miles every day all summer. Some days we'd pick it up a little bit at the end. Most days we'd pick it up a little bit at the end. So it became kind of a fartlek kind of run. And my 13-year-old brother said, can I run with you guys? We said, Keith, we're going 10 miles. And he would fall off halfway between. And I had no idea what was going on back there, whether he was walking or picking daisies or what he was doing. And at the end of the summer, he said, I'm going to go run the Bobby Krim race. And I said, Keith, that's 10 miles. He goes, yeah, well, that's what we run every day. And I was thinking, do you? I didn't even know for sure. And he ran 65:08.
Nice.
And I go, Keith, that's super impressive. Now, there's some 13-year-olds that are shaving, and there's other 13-year-olds that look like they're 8 years old. And my brother and I were both 13-year-olds that looked like we were 8 when we were 13. And Keith said, I was talking to people here, and everybody seems to be running the Free Press Marathon this year. And I'm like, what? I go, what do you know about the marathon? Knowing that I'm his only source of information, I pretty much doubled my mileage over the summer. And he said, he goes, I was talking to people. I think I'm just going to run what I have been and just run longer on the weekends. And he ran 3:20:01 in the marathon as a 13-year-old. And as a 14-year-old, broke 3 hours in the marathon at Maryland Marathon before he ever started high school. So I say that, and he still loves running now. So for all of those people that, there wasn't a parent pushing him. There wasn't anything like that. It was just all him. But a much more interesting start in the sport than myself.
Kevin, can you tell us, you were in business to sell running shoes and a little bit of apparel in the 1990s. And then out of somewhere comes this idea of a running team, the Hansons Brooks Running Team. I don't know if that actually sells shoes for you, but I suspect it wasn't the reason you started the team. Why did you?
It does not sell
Too
shoes for
bad.
us. I mean, it's kind of funny because other stores will say to you, talk to us about it like, hey, we think we'd like to do this. Can you explain the business model here? And it's like, basically, what had happened is we did not grow up with money, Keith and I. And so we started the store, and around 95, 96, 97, it was the doldrums in American distance running. We didn't have Amby Burfoot winning Boston marathons anymore. We didn't have Bill Rogers or Frank Shorter or Greg Meyer or Benji Durden or any of those people. It was really a dull time for Americans. And Greg Meyer became a big influence with Keith and I talking to him about, okay, we believe in group training. And the reason I say that is, if you look at the best places in the world and you say, well, obviously the East African countries, and they do group training for a different reason. They do it because they need to pool their resources. It's a financial reason to do it. But you say, what is obviously the third best distance behind Ethiopia and Kenya, or Kenya and Ethiopia? I'm not numbering them. And it's obviously Japan. And you go, well, wait a minute. Japan believes in group training as well. And we thought all of the successes of the United States back in that time were when pockets of people were going to train in Boston or Boulder or all of those kind of and we said, how can we duplicate that? And we decided that we could do it with the stores. So we basically bought a house and provided free housing, free equipment, and this was before Brooks or anything, free health insurance and free travel. And we just said, I don't care about having a boat. So business has been good. Let's spend our money here. This will be our passion. And so it started with something as simple as that idea of how can we duplicate what had been done before? So it started with that, and then it just kind of grew. And then in 2003, after us doing it for 4 years or so, several shoe companies had come to us and said, "Hey, we'd like to partner with you on this. How can we do this?" And but almost all of them wanted to do it where they would provide equipment. And Keith and I, who were spending basically $250,000 a year on the program, and they would give us $30,000 of equipment, call us partners. We said, well, I don't think that's, and without being rude, thanks, but no thanks kind of thing. And then there was an article that came out in the Wall Street Journal about us, in front page of the Wall Street Journal. And all of a sudden now all of the money people at the shoe companies started paying attention. And pretty much everybody started courting us then and saying, hey, we'll relieve you of the pressures that you have right now of what you're spending and so on and so forth. Keith and I never felt like that was pressures. We thought that was like something that we wanted to do. We were happy to spend our money that way. So basically, long story short, we ended up going with Brooks, who and under the assumption that they would match the amount of money that we are spending. And it started that way for about the first 5 or 6 years. But now Keith and I still continue to spend that money every year because we think it's part of our way of giving to the sport. But truthfully, Brooks spends 3 times that or so every year on us now. So it's they just keep escalating we don't. They just keep escalating what they have paid for it.
So tell us a little more about the team and the dynamic. How many runners do you have? Give us a little sense of what
we currently have. We currently have 20 athletes. 13 of them will be running in the Olympic trials in the marathon. 8 of them are women and 5 are men. This time around, that's always varied from year to year. There are other athletes that are have not yet attempted the marathon or that are part of the team. Those are the people I'm here with right now. That we're going to go run Club Cross together and have that experience. But
you're in Florida now.
But, I am.
Okay.
We're in Florida right now. Um, so we're going to we're down here. Just we went from the running event in Austin where they had a team event there in cross country, and then came over here. And I really love club cross country. I think it's one of the few times that pro teams can kind of do things as a team. So often you can go to an event and you can go to the Boston Marathon and have 3 or 4 athletes running, but it doesn't feel like a team. Like this feels like a team. This is one of the few events that's out there that you can have a team experience. And for everything that we do together, training wise and things day in and day out, it's important for us to have that team experience.
Kevin, we do want to get ahead to the upcoming trials and talk about your runners and some of the others and how you're preparing. But we would be remiss if we did not note that you have had Olympic success. You've had Brian Sell and Des Linden, who's gone to a couple of Olympics in the marathon. And I hate to ask you to summarize them in 120 seconds, but what was it? What was it about Brian Sell and Des Linden that made them tick in your program?
First of all, Brian was unique in the sense that Brian really came from the aspect of I want to outwork everybody else, and it created a mindset within things. It was like I'm a big believer in trying to work smarter. Brian was just, if somebody's running 150 miles a week, I'm running 160. If somebody's running 160, I'm running 175. It's like, and he legitimately just had that mindset. He was just an incredible worker, and it really kind of set a tone for our group. I tell stories about Brian all the time. There's things that with Brian that like are just amazing. Like he is such a worker. Like if he had downtime between after a marathon 2 weeks, he was like, mad at me for making him take downtime. He built a deck at the house during that time. I mean, he would at one of our houses that we had, he would build. I mean, he would do everything to keep himself busy and keep working. Brian's just the ultimate workhorse. Des is I think, and I think going still even in this trials, Des has gone. Both of them came from. Brian qualified for nationals in track, but Brian was lapped his in the 10,000 by Ryan Shea in his NCAA experience on the track. Des never qualified for an NCAA meet other than as a team in cross country. Des had run 16-17 5K and nothing even worse equally in the 10K where she's only ran it at like conference meets and things for points and stuff. So, but Des is I still think the smartest person in the room when they get out there on the course. If you see everyone running on one side of the road and Des on the other, it's because Des is running the tangent. She didn't screw up. I promise you that. And the same kind of things with Des. Sometimes you'll see where they go, oh, how come Des keeps falling off the back? And I'm like, she's not. She's running even. Everybody else is yo-yoing from the front. Okay, it's like so. It's there's things like that Des just innately has learned about the marathon that makes her, I think, better than she can get to 20 miles more efficiently than the people she's running with.
Well, 2 Olympics and a Boston Marathon Championship is really it proves your point for sure. And let me ask you this, if you're willing to chat about it, like often runners switch teams, switch coaches. She talked about it in her book and she left you. What was your take on it? That's probably, must be personal. It can't be so easy.
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. I mean, it was, I think she was realistic. She knew our expectations. And I think honestly that Des was at a point where she didn't need the benefits of what the program provides. And she honestly had so many things on her plate that kept her busy that she couldn't be the teammate that others were. and things. And I think she was just being honest with everyone.
Kevin, you've become kind of a resident expert of winter training in Orlando, Florida. You said to us earlier you've taken the team there for 20 years. You probably never imagined that the Olympic Marathon Trials were going to be in Orlando, Florida. But what
I had my fingers crossed and was praying, that's for sure. I was hoping.
You were rooting for them through all the controversy. So
I sure was.
So how does the Orlando environment potentially affect the trials? I mean, we know it could be cool, it could be warm, it could be humid.
Yeah,
what have you learned?
February is a strange month. I mean, we see that. I mean, we sometimes would make decisions. Well, we often make decisions because we have nothing else on our plate when we're down here. So we'll sometimes look and say, okay, we're not running until we're going to run at 9 tomorrow, and then the next day we're going to run at 7 tomorrow, just depending on how things change weather wise and so on and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it's Florida. And it's kind of hard to describe to people that aren't down here all the time because, like I always say, my sister lived in Florida for a period, and she'd come back to Michigan and have a winter coat on when it was 55 degrees because, it's so you can't really ask people that are down here in Florida because they'll all tell you, oh, no, that's our coolest month. But cool to them is different than cool to somebody from the Midwest or Northeast or, so other areas of the country just because of what they're accustomed to.
Your team, I think, could be called a blue collar team in many ways. Your guys are from Michigan. You're not in Boulder and Flagstaff and Oregon, and probably not getting a crack at a lot of those NCAA champions, as you just said when you talked about Brian and Des, two people that became Olympians in your program, that they weren't obviously heavily recruited out of college. And how has that affected you? And does it bother you in any way, or does it incentivize you? How do you feel about that?
I think that we're getting people that, and Des and Brian both fall into this category. They both knew that there was more there when they got out of college. And although the doors may not have been open for them to get the immediate contract that other people got and stuff, it kind of gave them that little grit. It gave them that little edge, that little I've got something to prove kind of thing. And I enjoy working with those athletes. I enjoy working with the athlete that has something to prove. Not that every athlete doesn't have something to prove, but I just think that they have I'm going to prove to these people that I'm as good as them. And I think that's a quality that's hard to teach people. It's only something that happens because of life experiences prior. And I like working with those athletes. Those are the athletes I'd prefer to work with than working with an NCAA champion. The other thing that happens with these athletes is they tend to be more appreciative. They tend to really appreciate things more. And we have very few people in our program that I would call entitled. That's not a word that we really comes with our group. And so I like that.
So there has been so much controversy over the Orlando Marathon Trials. As we speak right now, it sounds like the start time has been switched to about 10 a.m. It sometimes sounds like there's not an actual contract. It sounds like the athletes, and that means their coaches, managers, don't know what the prize situation is, the prize purse money. We're not even sure how they're going to pick the 3 men who go, hopefully, to Paris. How do you view all this stuff? Is it just what you have to deal with and get out and train tomorrow morning, or is it really bothersome because it seems not intelligent and coherent?
I don't find it bothersome. I really don't. I do not find, for me, if I knew every single answer to what people would like to know right now, it would not change one thing in how we prepared. It wouldn't change one thing in how I would handle tomorrow or the week after or the week after that. I know that it can be warm here at 8 o'clock. It could be warm here at 10 o'clock. It could be warm here at noon. I know that, and we're going to prepare as if it is. I like the fact that additional elements are there. I think that always plays to our advantage. And what I mean by that is, if it's hot, if it's cold, if it's hilly, if it's almost anything. I enjoy preparing for the Boston Marathon and the New York City Marathons because you're preparing for different courses. You're not preparing. Almost every person that I've ever coached, we debut at Chicago because we're preparing for the distance and not the course at that time. But I really enjoy the additional parts of the course that you have to train for and things. And after their debut, and I feel like they've got that under their hands, now we can take the next step.
Your runner Zach Panning is getting some talk as a dark horse contender, and do you see him in the mix here?
Not only do I see him in the mix, I do not see him as a dark horse.
Okay.
So honestly, I'm dead serious when I say that. There were 39 athletes that had run under 208 in Budapest this year. 39. Zach finished 13th on that day, has now become 12th because there was a positive drug test by one of the athletes in front of him. But he is that means he beat that many people that had run 208 previously. And so people are so glued to time so often that they don't really pay attention to what's going on and who you're beating and so on and so forth. But that's and also Zach had the advantage that day of it being in the mid 70s, almost reaching 80 before the finish line that day. And so do I want it warm in Orlando? Hell yeah.
Kevin, I've got a very basic question for you, and I'll keep it simple. How are the Olympic trials different from every other road race? What factors and mentalities and strategies come into play?
Well, the truth of the matter is, that it's a preliminary round. In other words, for people that are capable of making the team, it's a preliminary round. We often forget, and I emphasize this with our athletes all the time. In 2004, when Meb and Dina both medaled in Athens, and it was the breakthrough that I was so proud of because it showed that Americans are capable of competing on that stage. But the one thing that happened with both of them that people often forget, I'm sure you guys both know because you're historians, neither won the trials. Alan Culpepper won the trials, and Colleen Durock won the trials that year. Neither won the trials. It didn't really play a factor because it's a preliminary round. And so it's nobody remembers that, Noah Lyles got beat in the semifinals. It doesn't, that's what this is. So but the flip side of that is I do think that the trials, I'm one that's on the side of, I know it makes it hard on the people hosting the event, but I like softer qualifying standards because I think it works towards development. I think, and that's what I'm all about, is development of athletes. So I think sometimes that keeps people in the game. And if it keeps them in the game for a little longer, they find out, oh, wait a minute, this female finds out, now I'm flirting with 230. Oh, wait a minute, now I could be a 225 person, and so on and so forth. I think that that we can use it for both. I don't think it has to be just one or the other. Although it's there to select the team, I think it can be a developmental piece as well.
Kevin, a question about shoes, just a quickie. You're all going to be wearing Brooks shoes here. And I guess the question is, do you and importantly your athletes feel that the Brooks shoes now put them at the same level in the same position as those wearing the Nike and Adidas and New Balance, the super shoes?
I do. I feel like we have a great, It's so funny. When we started the business in 1991, 60% of all shoes that went out of our store were sold by Nike. I mean, everybody, 60% of them. But somehow or another, now the leading brand is Brooks within running specialty. And if you figure that out, it's because people there, their designers, the shoe people know what they're doing. And so Nike was definitely first to the table with this, no doubt about it. And they had a head start. But they were also first to the table with training shoes back, like I say, in 1991. And everyone has not only caught them, but passed them up. And I think the same thing will happen in super shoes.
So I've got a question about another product that's not a sponsor of yours, so you don't have to say good things about them. It seems to me that super carb consumption with as many gels and drinks and chews as you can possibly stuff in your mouth is what a lot of the elite marathoners are doing these days. Am I right about that? Are you trying to get your guys and women to take in more? And does the product matter?
Yes, the product does matter. And yes, we definitely are trying to maximize how much what the stomach handles. What's the magic number? What's the magic? The simplest advice that you get at every single expo, which is don't try something that you haven't done in training. And so basically, we work hard on it. We work hard on fluids and how much we can handle and how we handle it and so on and so forth. In training, we work with tables so that we're grabbing from a table. We're working with different products. To be honest with you, I don't think anything right now myself equals what Morton's doing. I think it's a step ahead of everybody right now. And maybe others disagree, but for us, that seems to be one that the stomach handles well. And services our needs as far as what we're trying to accomplish out there.
You mentioned that you didn't think Zach was a dark horse, but you see him clearly as a favorite. Tell us 2 or 3 other favorites in both the men's and women's as you look at the field. You're awfully close to it.
Obviously, my problem, I obviously consider Connor Mance and Clayton Young, who both have run the 2 fastest times, as people that are for sure going to be in the mix, no doubt about it. Scott Fauble has proven that he can run well and should be somebody that's considered. But I think Galen Rupp is still in the mix. And I know we haven't seen as much from him over the last couple of years, but he looked great in Chicago, knowing that Chicago was a springboard towards the trials. It was not his. And he had longer term plans than that. And he I don't think if he's on the starting line, you'll know that he's ready because he doesn't show up any other way. The only marathon I think I've ever seen him show up to that I thought he wasn't ready was when he was dinged up not this year, but a year ago for the World Championships in the marathon. And I think that was simply because of pressures of having to run because it was in Eugene. And I think, but that's the only time I've ever seen him where he isn't showing up ready to go.
Kevin, we're getting towards the end now. You've given us quite a bit of time. We're going to end with 2 standard questions for us. The first, because of the name of this podcast, Running the State of the Sport, is to ask you, what do you think of the state of the sport of running in the U.S. and globally now? What's really good? What's merely okay? And what could really use fixing up?
I mean, honestly, for us, if we're talking from the elite point of view, elite running wise, the women are a step ahead of the men. There's no doubt about that right now. And I think that I think that the men are coming. I think that there's other people that I didn't even mention on the men's side, like Footsum, I think is in the hunt. I think Bia is in the hunt. I think there's a bunch of other people that are not going to surprise me. Tesman Teshman, I don't know how to pronounce his name, who is a new American, is over the last 2 years. I think he's going to be in the hunt. I think there's a number of people, but I think the men still are a step behind. I think if Zach's 12th place at the World Championships was awesome, but Lindsay Flanagan was in the top 10 that day. Or that meet, and so and nobody even has her on their radar for the women. So I think the women are certainly a step ahead of the men.
So not just talking elite, but, retail store sales, mass participation. Are the stores back to where they were in 2019? Do you think that the whole foundation of running is at a good point?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that I would like to see better in the sport is something that we've worked on since we started the program. And that is to do a better job of making the casual runner fans of elite running and let them know that the separation that takes place is because runners in general tend to be shy people. It's not that these are people that are like, sometimes people think, these runners, they don't talk to us. It's like, yeah, I know they don't talk to anybody. It's like, so I'm always trying to do things with us locally. We're going to have a send-off party that I think we're going to have a couple hundred people at next week, Wednesday, before on December 13th for us locally and I really wish we could do a better job globally of making our heroes household names to everyone that runs.
And Kevin, finally, we're going to give you our famous 3 fairy godmother wishes. And you can't wish for more than 3. You only get 3. What would you like to see happen at the marathon trials in February and maybe beyond the trials, maybe all the way to Paris?
Yeah, I mean,
3 wishes.
I want to see the 3 people be the best 3 people. I don't want there to be someone that has a race that they've never had before. And even though that seems super exciting at the trials, but it usually doesn't amount to that person doing something at the games. And I would like to see us have people vying for a medal at the games for sure. But I would like to see all 3 athletes that we put on the line at Paris be competitive.
Those are good ones for sure. And Kevin, we want to thank you so much for joining us at this episode of Running State of the Sport. You told us a lot about your Hansons Brooks Running Team and gave us some insight on the marathon trials, which we're all looking forward to so much. So thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk to both of you. Thank you for your time.
George, that was a great conversation with Kevin Hanson. What did you find most interesting and compelling about what he had to say?
Yeah, there was a lot in there. One thing I took away was when we asked him if he felt the Brooks shoes, and of course they're sponsored by Brooks, and Brooks has been hugely supportive to the Hansons. Jim Weber, the CEO, has been a great backer of theirs and really made a difference in their running team. But when I asked him how he and his runners felt about the Brooks shoes, given all the talk and publicity around the Nike Super Shoe and now the Adidas shoe, the $500 shoe that just set the world record, and he didn't hesitate. He felt that the Brooks shoes at this point are absolutely at the same level. And I thought that was an important takeaway, because I think psychologically, if you're a runner and you're sponsored by a company, Brooks in this case, you don't want to think that you're going to the starting line with even a slight disadvantage over your competitors. So I thought that one was particularly interesting. The other thing is talking to him, just Amby, quickly about his take on the trials and who he saw as some of the favorites. And of course, he got into Connor Mance and Clayton Young and Galen Rupp and the big names. And I asked him if his runner, Zach Panning, was a dark horse, and he dismissed that. And he said, he's not a dark horse at all. He said, I put him as one of the favorites. And again, I think it's great for athletes to hear that from their coach publicly, that they put them, right in the top tier going into the trials like this.
Well, that's because I agree with you, of course. And the reason is that every year and every day we learn that the psychology, the mental aspect of running, believing in your shoes, believing in your coaches, believing in your replacement fuel is more important than we ever used to consider it. Back when you and I were trying to knock out marathons, we thought the only thing that mattered was how many 20-mile training runs you did before your race. And now there's so many other things. I particularly liked in our conversation right at the beginning, talking to Kevin, we sort of said, Kevin, if you were making a little money on those retail stores of yours, you could have, bought some stocks and bonds or loaded up on mutual funds or something like that. And he said, we're just not the kind of guys who need more boats and need more vacations and stuff like that. We felt that American running was in the doldrums in the late 1990s, and we looked around. We saw that Kenya had good training groups, good teams. We saw that in Japan, which wasn't one of the high-altitude East African countries, they were succeeding in the marathon with teams, and so that's what we wanted to do. So he said they were putting $250,000 into the team in those early years, and then Brooks came on, and he went so far as to say Brooks is more than doing its part these days. In fact, he said they were spending about 3 times as much as the Hansons. But that's still a lot of money, and it's been a couple of decades now, so you can't help but liking guys who are making a little money into the sport and then turning it over to the attempt to make U.S. running better and more representative at the international level. And that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with our next episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. And in signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving onward.